Hello and welcome to ADHD Support Talk Radio. My name is Tara McGillicuddy and I am the host of ADHD Support Talk Radio. I am also an adult ADD and ADHD productivity coach and the founder and director of ADDclasses.com. And at ADDclasses.com, we provide virtual support and education to people affected by ADD and ADHD. We offer free webinars. We have an extensive audio library with more than 175 hours of courses. And we also offer more in-depth support programs. You can learn more about ADDclasses.com and sign up for a free webinar, by going to ADDclasses.com. And with that, I would like to welcome back Tara Matlen to ADHD Support Talk Radio. In just a moment, we're going to be talking about ADHD and creativity. But before we get started talking about the topic, Terry, can you let our listeners know a bit about yourself and how to get in touch with you after today's show?
Absolutely. First, I want to thank you, Tara. I just called you by my name. That's really swift. But I want to thank you for inviting me back to your program. I always love being your guest because we have a lot of fun. But yes, I'm Tara Matlen, and I'm the director of ADDconsults.com, which is an online resource mainly for women with ADHD. And also another online resource I have is queensofdistraction.com, which is a group coaching program for women with ADHD. And I'm the author of two books. The first is Survival Tips for Women with ADHD, and my newer book is The Queen of Distraction, a book, again, for women with ADHD. So I basically help, like you do, you help people online. I also help people with online, but I focus more on women. And what a lot of people don't know is that I'm also an artist and an amateur musician. And you can reach me if you want to contact me by email. You can find me at Terry, Terry, at ADDconsults.com.
Okay, great. And yeah, definitely check out Terry's stuff. She's been doing this as long as I have, maybe even longer. She's one of the pioneers in ADHD online support, so definitely check out ADDconsults.com. And today we're talking about ADHD and creativity, and we're going back and forth a bit about what to talk about because you and I have been doing this so long. It's like, okay, what can we talk about now? And creativity is one that I know I've talked about it in the past. It can be somewhat controversial. So I guess the first thing to start with is, do you think, or are people with ADHD more creative than the average person?
You know, I think that we're still on the fence. If you look at the research, there's very little research on this topic. There was a study, maybe 2, maybe 3, not many, on kids with ADHD and creativity, and what they seem to find is that in some areas of creativity, there are more children with ADHD who are creative. There's very little research done on adults with ADHD. I'm aware of one study, maybe there's 2, which again shows an increase in creativity in adults with ADHD, but again, it's the amount of people that were studied were very few. So I don't think you can really get into, well, yeah, everyone with ADHD, we're all creative. On the other hand, as someone who's been in the field for as many years as you, Tara, I see personally in my clinical work and my coaching work, the people I see with ADHD do have a tendency of being extremely creative people. So I personally feel that people with ADHD do tend to be more creative.
Yeah, I do too, and I think it's more of like a muscle that a lot of us with ADHD have had to be very creative in order to survive in this world. So we've used our creativity more than the average person. So it may not necessarily be that genetically we were born more creative, but I really think we sometimes are more creative and use it more because we have to be.
I think that's a really good point, that we have to find strategies to make our world work for us. And as we all know, many, if not most people with ADHD do tend to think outside of the box. And that's what creativity is all about. It's about thinking outside of the box. If you look at painters, musicians, writers, they're not, in essence, you're not really inventing anything. You're taking things that you notice from internal and external resources, and you're putting it together in a new way. And that's what art is. It's putting together what's already out there in a novel way. And so if you have ADHD, you're noticing things all the time, often things that people don't notice. And I think it's really interesting that we're told that we have an attention deficit. I think that we don't. I think that we have the opposite, that there's a surplus of attention. We just can't garner it and use it in ways that other people use it. So I think that we're all over the place, and that can be an asset if you are an artistic kind of person. Now, an artistic kind of person can be a painter, a writer, a musician, but it can also be an entrepreneur. And we know, and research bears this out, that a lot of entrepreneurs have ADHD. But I really like your point that, it could be like a muscle. I think that's what you called it.
Yeah.
As a way to get through life with ADHD, you have to kind of be a creative thinker.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure a creative way to get the dishes done, though, and I think I just kind of have to do them like everyone else. Sometimes, I can be too creative, and it's like, okay, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Why don't I just follow the manual? Why don't I just follow directions that are out there? But
right.
Sometimes you were talking about the entrepreneur, and what I'm really good at is saying, okay, somebody's already doing this. How can I tweak it and make it so people get results quicker, or it's easier, or it makes more money? So that's where my creativity comes in. I'm more the entrepreneur. I don't know if I consider myself artistic, but I'm definitely creative when it comes to business ideas.
Absolutely.
And stuff like
I
that.
followed your career all these years, and you've always come up with really cool ideas. And I just think entrepreneurs, is creativity through what you're describing, through business and coming up with fresh ideas. And I find that whole area, because I'm also doing, projects all the time, very interesting. So, yeah, I think that our creative ways, our artistic ways, come out in different fashion.
Now, what can often get in the way of somebody with ADHD expressing creativity, and why?
Well, if you think about ADHD, and just separate the creative part of it, we have a problem, and let me explain to your audience, I do have ADHD too, that we have a problem with starting things, and of course we have a problem with finishing things. So we might get a creative idea, whether it's in the arts or in business or whatever, and we may, put off getting into it. We may put off jumping into it for a number of reasons. A lot of people with ADHD also have anxiety and depression. So what does that do? It means that it might be scary for us to start that new painting or write a blog post or start a new project for our business. It's scary. We're afraid of failure because there's been a lot of failures in our lives, especially, as children. If you've had failures in school, that follows you into adulthood, especially if you have not had any kind of counseling or psychotherapy. So all these back historical experiences come into play as an adult with ADHD who's trying to do something creative or artistic. So we have to take into account the ADHD symptoms, difficulty getting started, difficulty finishing a project, and then we get bored easily. So that, in a way, can work for an artist. So for me, for example, I'm a painter, and I can't stick with a painting for very long, so I'll start maybe a second painting, maybe a third one, and because I can't deal with boredom, I'll work through, one and then jump to the third thing, go back to the second one. For me, that works. Now, for some people, that doesn't work. So it can work for you, it can work against you. But, again, we were talking about adults with ADHD think outside of the box, and, we can get into trouble with that because, if we're jumping around too much, do you ever finish a project, an artistic project? So, looking at the ADD symptoms, it all comes into play when you're doing something creative and artistic.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us, especially growing up with undiagnosed, untreated ADHD, were penalized for being different. So sometimes we stifle our creativity because, what if somebody sees that and they don't get it? I remember when I first started the ADHD Awareness Expo, I was explaining it to people and they were looking at me like, huh? And I took it as, it's a bad idea. And somebody's like, Tara, people have no idea what you're talking about. They've never heard of it. They've never been to an in-person expo. They don't understand what you're doing. But then once I kind of, explained it so people can understand it, it made sense. But I think a lot of us, we're so creative. We have I don't want to say crazy, but out-of-the-box ideas. And people may not be as advanced as us and may not, they kind of have to catch up with our ideas. And I think that can, really get in the way of some people expressing their creativity too.
Yeah, but, you bring up a really interesting point about not being understood. And, growing up, I was misunderstood, and I felt out of step with the world. But I think that the art and music saved me. Back then, I had no idea what ADD was, let alone that I had it. But I knew that I was drawn to people who were artists and musicians. And it wasn't until much later in my educational career, not career but experience, it wasn't until high school that I realized that there were other kids like me who were taking art classes in high school who were a little off the beaten path. And that's what saved me. Honestly, it's really saved my soul, because I was a lost soul all those years of middle school especially, but everybody's a lost soul in middle school. But then I found, other people who had the interest like me, and I joined bands and took art classes and all that sort of thing. So it helped me, because a lot of us feel out of step with the world. Yes. So if it's not art, if it's not being creative, then we can expand on this whole topic to talk about, well, how can you find your tribe? How can you find where you fit in? What is it about you that is different? But instead of looking at it in a negative way, twisting it around and saying, well, this is a positive. Okay, so I am different from someone else, but I'm not going to shut that off anymore. I'm going to embrace it and celebrate it.
Yeah, because it's so important to be able to express your creativity and not stifle it. And, people thrive when they can express their creativity. And some people change the world and make the world such a better place by expressing their creative ideas and putting them into place and action. So, yeah, what you just said, you found a group that you felt comfortable with and that shared your interests.
And I think that helped me once I was diagnosed with ADD. I still felt out of step in different ways as I got older and I had kids. And, we've talked about this in other podcasts and webinars with you, that I was out of place. How come I couldn't get dinner on the table? How come I couldn't make my house look okay? And that was just unacceptable. But then when I stepped into the ADD world, I saw a lot of people who were struggling with the same thing. And then it didn't become abnormal. It became the norm, that going to the conferences, that everybody was losing their keys or dropping their purses and all that. So it's the same thing with creativity, as you find your group, or you start to access that part of you that you've been shutting down, and because you've not felt accepted all these years. Well, it's the same thing with the creative part of you, that it's time to open up those doors and the floodgates and let yourself do what your soul is asking you to do. If you don't listen to your soul, then you shut down and you get depressed and you get anxious and you take medication that's not in the right kind of way. So, yeah, I think it's really important to listen to yourself. What is my body? What is my soul? What is my heart and brain trying to tell me? And stop blocking it because you're so afraid of being different.
Yes.
And like you said, this world needs differences. This world needs creative people who think outside the box.
Yes, especially in today's society, we really need people who can think out of the box. You talked about, feeling accepted, being around a tribe who helps you feel accepted. What are other ways to help you access your creativity and be more creative?
I think it's sort of what I just started talking about, is acknowledging that there is a part of everybody that has a creative component to, whether it's, like you said, in the business realm, or if it's painting or poetry or acting or even cooking. Even just keeping up your house, or being, I was going to say being organized, but we don't have too many of those in our little group. But finding what it is that makes you feel good about just gardening, or being a public speaker. So it's first identifying what is it that I am good at or that I'm interested in, but I've been holding back all these years. And then starting to explore what is it that I'd really like to do, and then maybe taking classes. Teaching yourself, let's say you've always wanted to play the violin or guitar, whatever it is, and if you're not the kind of person that does well taking classes, I know I wasn't. I didn't flunk. I just didn't do well. I couldn't understand how to read notes, so I took it, to the bedroom. I took my guitar up as a teenager. I was 12 years old, and I was into the Beatles. Beatles were big at that point. and I taught myself how to play Beatles songs. So, it's
wow.
finding ways around. It's, again, that creative thinking. If you're not great at sitting in a class and listening to a teacher, then pick up an instrument and see if you can teach yourself. And now with YouTube, I mean, I was watching YouTube last night. I was curious about, this is going to sound weird, I was curious about some of the lead guitar parts in some Beatles songs that, the Beatles have gotten real hot again because of that new YouTube, that new Sirius channel for the Beatles. Beatles are hot, so I was curious about George Harrison. How did he play that piece in that song written in 1965? So I went onto YouTube and I learned it. So we now have a lot of resources that we can use to teach ourselves some of these skills so that we can begin to use these things to bring out the creative parts of ourselves.
Yeah,
so
and there's so much more. For those of us who may not be ready to get out there and join an in-person group, there are like instructional videos on YouTube. So there's so many ways now that you can tap into your creativity. So there's no reason not to, I guess, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I think because of the ADD component, again, there's that negative self-talk, so we have to work on that and put that aside. And when you're faced with it, like in my case, I can get just, freaked out by looking at a blank canvas and freeze up and say, okay, I can't do it, I'm leaving the studio. So whatever it is, whatever mode of expression you want to experiment with it, is to let it go and don't expect any kind of outcome. Yeah. It's just the act of expression to go for. Don't think about that final poem. Don't think about that play that you want to write or the poem or whatever it is. Just get that pen out or your computer pad and start typing. It's the mode of expression, and then once you break through that creativity will start to flow. I can promise you that. If you can break through that self-talk and that worrying about the end result, let that go and just express yourself, even if it looks like crap. They even have books on this, on how to break through these blocks, these creative blocks, and some of the exercises are to do just that. Get a pen and just start writing stupid things. Doesn't matter what it is, just do it.
Yeah, and allow yourself to enjoy the process or the journey and not worry about the destination or the outcome, the end product, which I think society, since the time we went to school, we've focused on the outcome, the grades, the finished result, and it can be challenging to get into that mode where we're focusing more on the journey or the process, but you just said there's tools to help us do that.
And the other cool thing about creativity and artistic expression is there are really no rules if you're doing this as a person who just wants to express themselves. And I'm not talking about, you want to be in the top gallery in New York City or get a play out in Broadway. I'm saying, just the pleasure of expressing yourself, which is a very healthy activity, by the way. There are no rules. And artists, they're known for breaking the rules. And we know that in ADD, there's a lot of us who are on the oppositional side of things, and we see things differently, and we may, not want to do things the same way as other people do. So this is a great way to step up and embrace your ADD along with your creative expression. I think it's a really, really cool combination of things. ADHD plus creativity, it brings in a lot of things that I think are important for us from our history as kids, like you just said about, having, a lot of problems in school for many of us. And now we can, as adults, break through that and say, well, this is who I really am, and let's find out who I am. It's a person with ADHD, and there's a creative component to all of us. Some of us haven't found it or are too afraid to express it for fear of letting not only ourselves down, but as you said, maybe in our minds we're letting other people down, and that's kind of sad to me.
Do you know of any online ADHD creativity focus groups or support groups or anything like that, Terry?
I kind of remember, maybe you remember, that there was, and it could have been.
I remember one from 1998 on Yahoo. I don't know if it's still there. Maybe it's time for somebody to bring one of those back.
There you go, another Facebook group.
Yeah.
I've got about 1 million of them, but I think that would be a cool thing to have, because then you could work as a group and share your insecurities and motivate others to just get started, because a lot of this is about getting started dipping that toe in the cold water and then immersing yourself into the pool. Starting is always hard, and you can be an artist, for many years. I've been painting since I was a teenager, but that blank canvas can be scary even now. All these years later. So I think that's a great idea, a support kind of group online to support each other in whatever area of creativity.
Yeah, and I can't think of anyone offhand, but I'm sure there's ADHD coaches who specialize in creativity too. I'm sure there's resources. Because you and I are ADHD experts, and we know creativity is a big part of ADHD. So I'm guessing most of the ADHD experts out there are familiar with it also.
Well, now you got me curious, Tara. I'm going to have to do a search online and see who's doing this kind of work. 'Cause I think it's really important. I think that we need this outlet, and that people with ADD are creative types. We are creative thinkers. And I love your point earlier about, using that as a way to get through life, because there's been so many difficulties that we faced growing up, but also as adults. So I like that point a lot.
Yeah. So, Terry, we are actually getting towards the end of today's show. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave people with today when it comes to ADHD and creativity? And could you definitely make sure you give out your contact information?
Yeah, well, again, I think we're all creative beings, whether you have ADHD or not. But if you have ADHD, it creates some extra barriers, the fear of failing because of our early history, but also a fear of success. I think a lot of us are afraid at some level to be successful because it doesn't always jive with how we see ourselves. So it can mean having to reset our buttons about who we are, that we can be successful, whether it's being a creative person. So I think that's important to start thinking of yourselves as a creative person who can access that creativity by reframing who you are. So don't be afraid. Jump in, find support, find people who are doing what you want to do. And like you said, maybe there's Facebook groups out there, or coaches. There's a lot of books on how to break through blocks, artistic, creative blocks. There's a lot of good ones. I can't think of the titles offhand, but they're out there. So, don't give up on yourself. We have in so many other ways, and we've talked about it in past sessions, you and me. So don't give up on your creative self. Now, to find out how to get a hold of me, go to addconsult.com. There's an S after consult, or queensofdistraction.com. Or you can email me. I'm always happy to talk to people on email at Terry with a Y-T-E-R-R-Y at addconsult.com.
Thank you so much, Terry Matlen, and thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to ADHD Support Talk Radio. And be sure to stop by our website at ADHDsupporttalk.com. Thanks again.
Thank you.